When the biggest fandom outside of Super Hulak goes on hiatus, you get new fandoms. And Homestuck's fandom decided to latch onto, funnily enough, 2 foreign video games, a Belgian RPG called Off, and a Japanese visual novel called Danganronpa. I got into Danganronpa only a few months before the big fandom explosion in summer of 2013. A couple of my Hitalia friends linked me the old Something Awful forum translation by Oren Ronin, knowing I had a thing for murder mysteries. And boy, was I hooked. Obviously, it could not replace my attachment to Hitalia at the time. God, I wish I did. But I spat out a fairly popular Naigiri fanfic. After that, I stuck to the sidelines and watched the hell unfold.
What about your student film parody, Dangly Ropes?
Salem, why is your persona Mono Neko? Why?
Because it can be.
You think you can do this in my vid? Oh wait, god damn it, I can't kick you out. You're the one who did the sprites.
That's right, and I can draw you whoever I want to. So, don't test me.
Joke's on you, Salem. Char's editing the vid and he wouldn't put something stupid in here. I hate you both.
Love you too, bro.
Char, just go back to the vid. Just go back to the vid. Thanks. The funny thing is, in 2013, no one outside of the essay forums or Tumblr had really heard of DR. In fact, an ongoing joke was that it was so obscure that surely it wouldn't get localized in the US. But the fandom is so massive now that the wiki's Twitter page is verified. You might be wondering, what was it like in the Tungle days? How did it go from collective Tumblr fandom to what it is today? Well, Danganronpa came out in Japan for the PSP in November 2010. The game, as some of you may know, is set in a high school where 15 students are trapped inside and the only way out is to kill someone. And if you don't get away with it, you'll suffer the consequences. It was an instant smash hit, with a prequel light novel coming out in 2011. And that very same year, a member of the Something Awful forums, Oren Ronin, decided to translate it. Oren Ronin claimed that the game's content and platform would make it impossible to localize it. Therefore, the only way to go was fan translation. Oren's translation relied on screenshots and cropped sprites. Other times, he would record trials and upload them unlisted on YouTube. The Let's Play totaled 128 foreign posts that encompassed the normal, investigation, and trial parts of each of the 6 chapters. The translation started on November 5th, 2011, and concluded on December 30th, 2012. In 2013, Oren would start translating the sequel, Super Danganronpa 2. SDR2 came out in Japan for the PSP in July 2012. In January, NIS America announced that they would be localizing the 2 games in 2014. Later that year, Danganronpa's publisher, Spike Chunsoft, announced a game taking place between DR1 and SDR2 called Ultra Despair Girls coming 2014. They also teased that there would be a 3rd game to conclude the series. Danganronpa's growing popularity was perfect timing too. Homestuck hit a hiatus on its 4th anniversary. Massive amounts of fans poured in, and the anime announcement helped make the push. With the SDR2 translation underway, the original game translation complete, people starved for content went ahead and moved right in. Let me just say this. The early Danganronpa memes, fantastic. Easily some of the funniest things I have ever seen out of a fandom. I Want Komaeda to Run, Komahino of SeaWorld fanfic, hi Zach, the Hinata John Balani vids, all of those blogs dedicated to shit like Hinata running, hurt feelings. There's a bunch I think got deleted, but anyways, I have not seen another fandom so dedicated to laughs like this. Well, okay, Homestuck. Sprite edits anyone? One meme originated from the Something Awful forums putting up a paywall. To join the forums, you have to pay a $10 membership fee, and if you don't have an account, you couldn't read some threads. The paywall was so infamous that people started cosplaying it at cons. Anyways, the anime dropped in July 2013, and more people hopped right on board the funky murder mystery. At the same time, people were getting a little disappointed that the SDR2 translation was taking a little longer than anticipated. Granted, you have to remember that DR1's translation was already finished when most everyone joined. Fans were impatient for SDR2. People imported the game if they could speak Japanese, so now spoilers are coming out. So many spoilers that the entire TV Tropes page for Super Danganronpa 2 had spoiler filters all over it. Others wanted to wait until there was a fully translated game, and that wouldn't happen until 2014. There was an attempt for an English patch emulator, similar to the one for DR1, but it got cancelled because of the official translation. Others went ahead and read all the spoilers on the TV Tropes page. No matter where you were at in the story, you probably tagged SDR2 spoilers. All the time. If you didn't, people got mad. Tumblr's SDR2 spoilers tag was last updated in 2016, around the time of the Danganronpa 3 anime. Another reaction was to find alternative fan translations. None are technically complete and often relied on the something awful translation for continuity. Nevertheless, even without the translation, there were plenty of other content the franchise supplied, such as the anime, and it even hinted there'd be a season 2. Except the anime was not a fan favorite. The thing was rushed, it cut out a lot of stuff, and then Kodaka would later come to say that there would be no adaptation of STR2, as in his own words, I already told the story of that cast. Side note Kodaka, you already told the story of the DR1 kids with the anime, but okay. Now, with it over, Oren Ronan still not having finished the STR2 translation, and several other fan translations abandoned or not complete yet, people left. Sure, some people stuck around to wait out until the official games dropped in 2014, but it was very slow going. We'll pick back up after this commercial break, because the other biggest reason people left wasn't just the lack of content, it's probably what this fandom is most known for. The thing that really made the DR fandom so notorious was that it was the epitome of constant, annoying, quote-unquote, discourse. Danganronpa wasn't the first fandom to argue about these things, obviously. The difference here is starting to use the word discourse to specifically mean argument. In old LiveJournal days, it was dubbed drama and wank. I don't mean that the bad content in DR shouldn't be called out. Believe me, Danganronpa has its fair share of absolute garbage. It's just fans weren't fully grasping what they were talking about and had a fear of saying something problematique. So it led to the infamous weird social justice PowerPoints. I can't say if the PowerPoints were made in good faith, they just looked like someone who wanted to be aware of social issues, but didn't want to be labeled as an SJW. That's an entirely different topic for another video, but let's go back to Danganronpa. The other biggest thing was, Kenny shit. I first saw fict kinning when I was in Danganronpa, but according to my other friends, the first instant of it being mainstream on Tumblr was Homestuck? I don't know, I could be wrong. If you don't know what fic kinning is, I don't know how you missed all that, but people just relate a lot to a character in a piece of media. There's other definitions, but I'll keep it simple. I don't really care if you still fic-kin, but the approach to it, especially in this fandom, was a little odd. Various posts on the fanlore page for Danganronpa have testimonials from a DR confession blog talking about things ranging from going against the canon they claim to be from and apologizing for their character's behavior, others saying they wouldn't get into the fandom if it had a large kinning base, and finally complaining about Komaida-kins. The most infamous Komaida-kin in the Danganronpa fandom was Despair Komaida. Unfortunately, the master post about what he did is partially deleted. The gist is that this guy, Kin Komaida, and even went by Koma? He was a serial abuser who used the guise of being mentally ill as to why he was allowed to do it. In addition, Koma outright admitted to having raped people and claimed to either be Japanese or half Japanese to get away with kinning an anime character or something. He also reportedly shoved a knife up his ass. There's even fan art for it in the Tumblr tag. Absolutely nuts. Within the continuity of the fandom though, two specific characters caused, well, discourse. Let's start with the first one, Chihiro Fujisaki. I'll start with a disclaimer for this section. I am a cis woman. This was vetted by various trans friends. Some of what I'm about to say came from their own discussion regarding Chihiro. In addition, I'll be using they pronouns for Chihiro since there are many interpretations of their gender. This is not indicative of my own views. For those who aren't aware, Chihiro Fujisaki is from the first game in the franchise, and spoilers if you plan on playing this game, but becomes the second murder victim. During the investigation and later part of the trial, it's revealed, in the canon itself, Chihiro isn't a woman as previously thought, but a man. Backstory is that Chihiro got bullied for being a weak man, and so in turn they decided to dress more femininely and let people assume that they were a woman. The revelation that Chihiro is a man is actually done very inappropriately in the game. The remaining students return to their corps during the trial to investigate a discrepancy, and long story short, they lift up Chihiro's skirt to seek the truth. The motivation to kill in this chapter was to prevent deep dark secrets about the students from being broadcasted to all, and unfortunately Chihiro's was the fact that they are a man. So now here comes the problem. Many people agree that Chihiro's backstory was easily read as a trans person, especially with the inappropriate reveal of their assigned gender at birth and the fact that we never get to hear how Chihiro themselves wants to be referred to as in the game. The only canon information we have in regards to their gender is based on what they told another character in private. However, in a game mode that is only available after beating DR1 from the re-release bundle pack for the PlayStation 4, Chihiro tells the main character, Makoto Naegi, that they are a man. One could argue that this is debatably canon since it's from a special edition game. Some took the reveal of their gender as canon and read them as a man. For lack of a better term, dude bros often took this take for obvious reasons. LGBT fans, on the other hand, were divided. Many headcanoned them as a trans woman to rectify what they read as men tricking people into thinking that they're a woman trope. Others, particularly trans men, felt that it was insensitive to equate presentation to gender when the text says Chihiro is a man. A few trans women were not fans of the trans femme interpretation. In fact, 2 Japanese trans women themselves wrote posts on Tumblr about how Chihiro's gender is intended to be a criticism of toxic masculinity. One post was written in response to a cis woman's PowerPoint about representation in anime. She expresses disappointment that Americans are applying Western values to explicitly Japanese characters, citing that doing so is cultural imperialism. She added that headcanoning Chihiro as trans is a bad idea. Unfortunately, people misunderstood the post and ran the poster off the site. Another post written by a trans woman said that Chihiro is likely a reference to a group of gender nonconforming men in Japan called Otoko no Kono. The group started as a counterculture to the masculinity men are expected to perform in Japan. They gained prominence during Danganronpa's development in 2009. The fandom still has disagreements on Chihiro's gender to this day, though more recently, many people have started to read them as non-binary. I think any interpretation of Chihiro's gender is fine. I can see why anyone would read them as a woman, man, or non-binary. It's a little dumb to have Chihiro's conflict be, people see me as weak, so I'm gonna let them assume I'm a girl. It's likely commentary on how people view women, but that reads kind of weird, speaking as a woman. My issue is reacting with vitriol to anyone who disagrees with their headcanon and being very transphobic in response. Though I really do think it's a free-for-all in terms of headcanon in this case because, oh my god. Kodaka admitted in an interview that Chihiro is the combination of 2 beta characters, in his own words, a Shota character and a lolly character. Kodaka claimed he wasn't aware of the cross-dressing trope in Chihiro's creation. It just happened to work that way and, well, the rest is history. Let's trust Kodaka to never write anything involving LGBT issues ever again. And speaking of Kodaka and LGBT issues, let's talk about
fingers in his ass, fingers in his ass, Kanye West he live.
Nagito Komaeda. Okay, so I feel it's important for me to say the following controversial statement before we get into this. Komaeda did not originate the light-haired gay twink who is weird and does questionable things trope. Stop calling it the Komaeda archetype. Your Asuka from the 1972 Devilman manga, not Crybaby. I'm talking about the manga, is the little progenitor of this trope. Proof being that 2 of Komaeda's influences, Kouara Nagisa from Eva and Joshua Keeter from The World Ends With You, are both exes of Your Asuka. Chiaki Nanami and Hajime Hinata are also arguably Miki Mikimura and Akira XPs, respectively. Do not start with me. I've consumed almost every single piece of Devilman media. Do not start with me. Okay, I'm good. If you haven't consumed Danganronpa, I have no idea who the man behind the memes is. Let's break it down. Nagito Komaeda is a character from the second game, Super Danganronpa 2. Essentially, he's a secondary deuteragonist and helps the main character, Hajime Hinata, during the trials. Though he has his own agenda that often aligns with Hinata's, he comes across as being very kind, but at times Komaeda is manipulative, shown especially during trials when he tries to figure out who the culprit is. What makes him so interesting is that during the first trial, Komaeda reveals that initially the murder plot was his idea, and tries to convince everyone he was the culprit. The iconic ice squirrel screen cap coupled with this revelation made it apparent that Komaeda was a little batshit. In actuality, he didn't kill anyone and only convinced people he was to see the actual culprit's reaction. The cast is distrustful of him, knowing that he originally intended to kill one of them. Komaeda has some self-hatred issues and tells everyone that they're free to murder him. Throughout other trials, he's very mysterious and Hinata is conflicted in his feelings towards him. Komaida's got a tragic backstory, as is the tradition, and therefore has a lot of weird morals. He does things that he believes are for the greater good, such as causing despair and hopes, haha, it will bring hope. Huge ass spoiler warning coming up. Towards the end of the game, Komaida finds out that they're in a virtual setting. It turns out he and his classmates are actually part of an organization that orchestrated the end of the world. Their memories have been erased in an attempt to cure them of their despair. Komaida then begins to concoct a plan that would kill all the other students and leave the only non-member of the organization, later revealed to be Chiaki Nanami, alive. She is dubbed the traitor by the antagonist. Komaida plants a fake bomb on the islands the students are located on. While they were distracted with trying to find it, he planned an elaborate suicide and set a trap. Using his luck, he hoped, that the traitor would be his killer, and it went according to plan. Nanami unintentionally delivers the final blow. While this sounds completely batshit and I'm trying to make Komaida seem like insane, during the investigation, Nanami and Hinata do find evidence that he actually did care about his classmates and wanted to give them a chance. After the conclusion of the trial and Nanami's subsequent execution for technically killing Komaida, they find a final video message from Komaida. He tells them a code to get out of the world they're in to defeat its mastermind, believing that this is the way to lay down foundation for a world of hope. Komaida begs the remaining students to praise him. Despite all that, Komaida has a soft spot for Hinata, who feels they're similar in a way. Even in one trial, Komaida did his best to make sure Hinata could prove his innocence and not be pinned as a culprit. When they attempt to solve Komaida's murder, Hinata thwarts his plans to kill all of them because he understood Komaida well enough. There are special events outside of the main game called free time events where you can interact with the cast, learn backstories. You can only get Komaida's true free time events if you spend one of the first 2 open times with him specifically. They give you actual insight into his character and parts of his backstory. If you don't use those 2 specific slots, you can still have FTEs with him, but you won't get the real ones, which may or may not have changed your perception of him if you got those events. Let's head back to the fandom interpretation. People often either flat out hated him or loved him. I recall one post saying you were ableist if you hated him. Once again, people applying things that they learned on Tumblr to fandom. And of course it was 2013, and what did that mean? You guessed it! People discussing what was and was not bad gay rep. From what you can tell previously, Komaida and Hinata had a thing going on with them, so they were often shipped. Fandoms like it when boys are in love, and there were about 2 decent MM ships from the first game, but Komahina became the MM ship. Shippers actually got chastised for shipping it since it really wasn't considered good gay rep. The fandom enjoyed portraying it as Hinata being weirded out by Komaida and Komaida being obsessed with Hinata. This came from Oren Ronin. Oren Ronin was not really a fan of Komaida, citing in his thread that he wasn't a well-rounded character. Komaida won 2 free time event polls in a row, so he immediately changed how the voting worked for the next round. Other times, he purposefully skips talking to him. The official localization was released with the realization that Komaida's personality wasn't that extreme. Rumors started that Oren Ronin purposely botched his translation because of his dislike. There is some truth to that, but not in the way you think. His translations aren't incorrect per se, but he chooses the worst possible phrasing for him and often changes the tone. Other fan translations continue this tradition as well. A friend who spent a good amount of time comparing translations for me, just to check to see if this rumor was true, can explain it better than me. Mr. Michael Rival Cobalt, take it away.
Hey, Michael here, local Komaida expert. Firstly, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm not fully fluent in Japanese and I've never lived in Japan myself. That said, I've used Japanese dictionaries to check any new words I ran into, and the grammar used in Danganronpa isn't a challenge for me. Also, Komaida and Hinata are my 2 favorite characters from this series, so while I'll be trying to be as unbiased as possible, if there's anything that reception of Super Danganronpa 2 has taught us, it's that it's very hard to actually be unbiased when it comes to Nagito Komaida. Despite the rumors about Oren Ronin's translation intentionally skewing Nagito still definitely floating around in the modern Danganronpa fandom, we couldn't find anything truly investigating this, so I went through his post translating Super Danganronpa 2 on the Something Awful forums with help from a second translator, Bejewel, from 2013 to 2014. Because of the difficulties with translating between Japanese and English, I won't be nitpicking too closely, nor will I be going over every little change he made for the sake of length. I will also be providing my own quote-unquote literal translations for the Japanese lines. They're about as close to literal as I can get without them sounding really weird in English. In general, I think Oren Ronin's translations suffer from the common problem of fan translations being technically correct, but too literal and not really localizing the language to sound like actual normal English conversations. Probably because when you get used to Japanese, it's easy to forget just how strange a lot of direct translations sound in English. I don't know how noticeable this would have been to fans already familiar with Japanese media in 2013, but phrasing weirdness may have also played a role in interpreting how Komaida felt as a character. Of course, the same weirdness also applies to the other characters, but They may have been given more unconscious leeway from fans, since Komaida's monologues about hope and despair can be hard to wrap your head around the first time, even without the extra phrasing oddities. As early as the character introductions, we start to see some things that Komaida says being not quite accurate in ways that make Komaida sound more sinister or threatening than he does in the original text, despite being a fairly literal translation otherwise. The earliest example that I caught was in Mikan's character introduction. The official English translation is pretty literal here. There's no mention of Hinata's life being at stake in the first message or offending Mikan further than what is already implied by the previous sentence. At least explicitly. I won't get into the difficulty around translating wakeda into English in general, nor the more graphic description of injury in the second. Here, he straight up adds on the metaphorical darkness as an analog for part to the end, maybe to make Komaida sound more obnoxious, if I had to guess? The first line also hides that the way Komaida phrases it, that no one can see in the dark, is actually a huge hint to Hinata to use Ibuki's hearing to figure out what happened. Komaida was with him when talking to her during the investigation, and this certainly is not the only time in the game that he helps Hinata by slipping him clues but leaving it up to him to catch on to them. In fact, looking back at the Chapter 1 investigation, he's even the one that suggests asking others about what they heard during the blackout, specifically after Hinata says he doesn't know what happened since he couldn't see. This is actually not the first time that a similar kind of haha get it has been added in for Komaida for no actual reason. And yeah, this next one is kinda nitpicky, but phrasing appearance as impeccable personal hygiene, as well as the finally as though he's been waiting for someone to notice, gives off a notably more obnoxious and narcissistic air here in my humble opinion. I think I get why he chose to use personal hygiene, since the misunderstanding here is that hide is an adjective that can mean either clean or pretty, which doesn't really have an English equivalent that shares the double meaning. The official translation decided to just leave it in as is, which might also be confusing to fans who don't know this. Thanks to Japanese using implied subjects, I feel that it's also implied that the praise he never obtained from his mother was specifically about his appearance and not himself as a whole. This one, I'll let the images do most of the talking. Going from, it kind of feels like a broken dream, to, I had such expectations and you are dashing them. This one is actually pretty significant of a change in my opinion, with how much he's saying he's disappointed in Teruteru and had expectations rather than being sad to see him fail gives an entirely more condescending and self-centered vibe. And here, in general, the most direct translation that you're going to encounter for tatakao is fight, which isn't to say that struggle is wrong, but it kind of feels like a deliberate choice. Not to mention that he simply says Komaida wants to see them struggle, but doesn't mention the fact that he wants to see them win in the end. I think you get the pattern just from the first chapter alone. An interesting line from the free time events that both Oren Ronan and the official translation got it half right in a way is this one from his second event. The second lines here are quite different in meaning, but they actually both play off of ikasa being able to mean both to let live or to be kept alive as well as to make best use of. I actually did manage to find another person note this in their own fan translation of the event in the process of trying to find the original Japanese text. So yeah, he does choose the less favorable of the two meanings. The skewed lines are only a fraction of Komaida's total lines, and many are not major changes or are technically correct. But there's enough there that, especially given that the Something Awful translations were the only ones to translate the beginning of the game, or were the base for other translations of the beginning, for me to believe that he very well could have had a hand in just how wild the fandom was regarding Komaida back in 2013. Some amount of the polarization is just inevitable thanks to who Komaida is as a character, thus is the Ryo family inheritance. But what I've seen of the fandom since 2019 feels different from what I see when I go back to Tumblr blogs from the original Danganronpa fandom boom. The official translation, despite all the faults that it definitely has, I'm looking at you especially, Komaida Free Time Event 5, generally tends to translate Komaida as favorably as possible, and I think it's very likely that that had an impact on how the fans viewed him then versus now. Though maybe having some older fans around who were there for the Komaida discourse the first time and have already seen it all also helped calm things down. Or maybe I've just been lucky in who I've run into, who knows.
In essence, the fandom nowadays doesn't treat Komaida the way the fandom did way back when. Komahina is the most popular ship in the fandom, totaling almost 5,000 fics on AO3. A lot of this probably came from the is ship good gay rep, but in turn, when people were trying to call out homophobia in media, they just started being homophobic towards canonical gay characters. Kodaka also had weird comments on Komaida, saying he's like the Joker and you're not supposed to be able to figure him out. Komaida is fine as a character, I think he's interesting, but I'm pretty neutral on him. With all this discourse on these two specific characters, and what was the right way to read them, no one ever seemed to give attention to Toku Fukawa's discourse. Fukawa is from the first game, and to keep it simple, it's revealed she has dissociative identity disorder, and her alter, gendercide Suyo, is a serial killer. Fukawa and Suyo switch out via passing out or by sneezing. If anything, this is arguably one of the worst things the series has ever put out. Let's see. The Alter's a crazy serial killer, and the way they switch out is so incorrect. Like, what are you trying to say about people with DID? You would think that after calling people who hated Komaeda ableist, surely this would be a big topic. Wrong. Rarely if ever have I seen anyone talk about it, even now. I never see any posts or meaningful discussions about it. I can't pinpoint exactly what the lack of discussion is. It might have to do with something with Fukawa not being a fan fave / being a woman. It was easier to take things that were more apparent in their wrongness than it was for people who didn't understand something very well, such as DID. Surely the fandom today isn't like that! It isn't the fandom's fault that Kodaka clearly wants to pander to otaku more so than he actually wants to write a good story, hindering anything meaningful. But that concludes the word from our sponsor. Let's go back to 2014, shall we? With the anime over and people getting impatient about SDR2, the fandom was itching to get the localization. The initial release in North America was for the PS Vita, which came out as Danganronpa 1-2 Reload in Japan in October 2013. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc released in February 2014. Fans still had to wait for SDR2. SDR2 would not come out until December 2014, but then tragedy struck. After months of slow updates, Oren Ronan said in a podcast that he would not be continuing the SDR2 translation.
But they haven't at any point, stepped in. You said you're working on the second one. You haven't heard anything that would.
No, I didn't, and they shouldn't. I don't think they should contact me. I mean, I'm just a fan translator. I'm not doing anything officially, so unless they want me to stop. But they think I'm going to stop anyway, so they shouldn't worry.
Oren Ronan addressed it in the thread, citing the official translation as the reason for the cancellation. Most decided to just go ahead and wait for the official one. As per usual, some did not. There were about 3 fan translations for SDR2. The first one was done by a person named Kuzuhiko. It started in Chapter 2 and relied on Oren Ronan had already done. This was a more liberal translation, as she would take screenshots and post the dialogue in a Google Doc. Unfortunately, she never finished and left off in Chapter 4. The blog is now password protected. Birdman Rampa picked up the translation from Kuzuhiko and is the only translation to get to the end, starting from Chapter 4. He relied on Oren Ronan and Kuzuhiko's translations for continuity. Birdman took screen recordings of the game and uploaded them unlisted on YouTube. Though I'm not really sure if many people were aware of this translation, he finished translating the game in July 2013, actually. Birdman Rampa's videos have around 30,000 views, but the fan translation I watched has around 100,000. The Lifelike TextTube did a similar translation starting in December 2013. It starts at the beginning of Chapter 2 and relies on the prologue and Chapter 1 translation from Oren Ronan. He used Kuzuhiko and Birdman's translations for Chapters 4 through 6. The translation was completed in June 2014. But wait, you say? What about Ultra Despair Girls? Well, I don't really have anything nice to say about it. I hated it, never finished it, it sucked. The story was kind of pointless, relied on doing weird things to little kids, and had a disabled person fake being disabled. She's also like the antagonist. What about that teased third game? Well, we didn't hear anything about it, actually, until 2015. The story of Danganronpa would not be concluded with a game, but with an anime. Instead, the third game would start an entirely new arc. To celebrate, both games were put on Steam in early 2016. Danganronpa 3, End of Hope's Peak, aired for the fall 2016 anime season. Anime would be split into 2 parts, a 12-episode conclusion for some loose plot threads, future arc, and a 12-episode prequel for the SDR2 cast, Despair Arc. Like Ultra Despair Girls, it sucked. The future arc was another goddamn killing game, except most of those who died were new characters. It turns out that the killing game was dumb and pointless, didn't even really add anything to the story or conclude anything from DR1. Not to mention how fan fave Kyoko Kirigiri was almost fridged. The prequel was poorly received because while it gave backstories and content for a lot of SDR2 faves, it retconned so much established stuff. Another fan fave got fridged, Chiaki Nanami. Didn't Nanami get killed in the original story, you say? I hear you. In the SCR2 virtual world, Nanami was just an AI. Despairside essentially made Nanami a real person to add man pain for Hajime Hinata. By the time the anime finished, no one was really happy with it. It soured a lot of fans' views of the franchise. This was what was going to close out the series? An anime that was essentially pointless, an ending that ruined the point of the series, and another anime that ruined several characters. Okay, but Komaeda with a gun is very, very good. Thank you, Komaeda with a gun, for your service. But not to worry. The new game, New Danganronpa V3, was arriving early 2017. A new game with a whole new cast. Great, perfect, wonderful. Hey guys. Guess what? Guess what I'm about to tell you? NDRV3 sucked ass! Where to start with NDRV3? Where do I start? Let's start with the fact that most of the promotional material featured the first female lead in a main game, Kaede Akamatsu. But surprise! Kaede is a false protagonist. She gets executed in the first chapter, and another character, Suichi Saihara, a male character, becomes the protagonist. For the sake of time, I am not going to get into Koichi Oma. I hate that great piece of shit. Get that knockoff Gamzee out of my sight. You wish you were Komaeda. You wish you were Komaeda, you Nazi looking at. At the conclusion of the game, it's revealed that this is actually a television show. We were playing the 53rd season of Danganronpa. So basically, after 30 hours of playing this game, you find out it's a lie. Even the characters aren't who they say they are. They have their whole personalities changed to become a character in the game. They call the audience disgusting for liking media that involves teenagers killing each other and wanting more content of it. What we can deduce from this is that Kodaka is telling the players, fuck you for ever liking Danganronpa. Only a few months after its release, Kodaka left Spike Chunsoft. Whatever old fans were left had their final straw. That was the final straw for me too. I vowed I would never consume any more Danganronpa content after that disappointment of an anime and a game. Now I'm doing a vid about Danganronpa, but that's beside the point. Surprisingly, NDRV3 introduced a lot of new fans to the game. A lot of them like it, but this is my video, and I do not like it. The period after NDRV3 was an odd one. The fandom practically exploded. It's just really funny considering that a lot of older fans, NDRV3 is what made them leave. Now the fandom has outgrown its Tumblr Kinney status and is a meme on Twitter and TikTok. Not to mention that later this year, it's gonna be on the Nintendo Switch. Absolutely nuts. I really haven't been into DR for years, and despite NDRV3 ruining the franchise for me, I don't particularly hold any disdain for it. It's incredible to see how big this fandom has gotten. I recall seeing an old Damara Medigo fan art with the Junko Bear clips and the caption, "Subtle crossover" in late 2012. At the time, I didn't even know what that meant. And now it's just a huge franchise in the West, when we all thought this game would never come overseas. It's weird to think about how for most of 2012, it stayed insular on the Something Awful forums, and then it spread to Tumblr and exploded. It was really that obscure. I'm not sure if DR would have come over without Orin's translation, but it's so strange to think that this one singular person introduced it to Anglophones everywhere. Rarely, if ever, do I see old fans, people who got around to it the time I did, actively talk about it or think about it unless they go, haha, remember that one funny meme? The fandom is mostly new people, which is, again, weird to think about. I wouldn't say if Danganronpa is actually good. Kodaka's writing is kind of shoddy at best, and he often writes characters around tropes and never gives them a chance to be fully fleshed out. Yet, despite all that, people still like the games. Even though Kodaka has never written anything good after SDR2, but I digress. Yet, people still manage to discourse about everything he's ever written. I guess that's why he made a game that says, "I hate DR fans, die." It is very fortunate we will never see a Kodaka-led Danganronpa piece of media again. Because, kids, if there's one thing we've learned from my research and liking Danganronpa in general, Kodaka is a motherfucking hack. Good night, you bastards.